Miami Jewish Federation. This week's Parashah, Shelach, everything falls apart. We encounter the disastrous episode of the spies and its aftermath. While the beginning of our book of Bamidbar talks about the encampments, all of the camps ready to enter the land of Israel, this week we find this idealistic ending completely falling apart. Jewish destiny in this week's Parsha will be delayed for 40 years. The entire generation of the desert will not enter the land of promised land. Let's recap the story. Moses sends 12 scouts to tour the land. They return actually with a great report, even bringing samples of the produce. Yet, they say, we can't conquer this land. There are giants and fortified cities. However, 2 of the 12 spies, Joshua and Caleb, say, no, we should have faith. Indeed, we can conquer the land, and God will deliver them to our hands. Nonetheless, the 10 other scouts disagree, and they begin a disinformation campaign, convincing the people that to go into the land of Israel will be the end. It's a land that, quote, eats up their inhabitants. The people become scared, understandably, and they begin to cry. They complain to Moses and Aaron, you took us out of the land of Egypt, and now we're going to die in the land of Israel battling for this country. It's better for us to never left Egypt, they say. So God hears these complaints and punishes them. You say, I'm taking you there to die? Well, you will all die, but you won't die in the land of Israel. You'll die right here in the desert. You'll die and languish here for 40 years. You scouted the land in which you were to enter for 40 days. That was your destiny, to enter the land. But now you will remain in this desolate place for another 40 years. The story of the spies is a story of destiny unrealized. The people and that generation didn't take hold of the moment, and so that moment passed. They remained nomadic without a home. Now, in Jewish tradition, the day when the spies gave a bad report is the day of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day that commemorates the destruction of both temples as well as other great tragedies. It's considered the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. It's a fast day, and just like the generation of the desert, Tisha B'Av becomes a day when we remember all of the exiles, all periods of homelessness, all periods of destiny denied. How do the rabbis connect the report of the spies to Tisha B'Av? Because the Midrash says that that day that the Jewish people cried, God says, Atem bechitem bechia shel chinam. You are crying for no reason. I will give you something to cry for all future generations. And so Tisha B'Av is a day of crying for all time. Now, interestingly, of all of the sins in the desert, you would think the worst sin would be the golden calf, and yet God forgives the Jewish people for the golden calf after a while. But God does not really forgive the people completely for the sin of the spies. They will all die over the course of 40 years. The question is why? And to answer this question, I'd like to refer to a really fascinating book, Em Habanim Smecha. This book was written in the mid-1940s by Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Techtal, a Munkach Chassid. He died at the hands of the Nazis in the year 1945. Now, what's interesting about this man was, in his early life, he, like many of the Hasidic leadership, were fierce opponents of Zionism. But, and why was he against the Zionist movement? Because the Zionist movement ultimately was secular. How could we have a national movement that was not informed by the ideals of the Torah? However, after seeing the Holocaust and experiencing the trauma of the Jewish people and the destruction of Slovakian Jewry, he theologically changed, and he wrote a very long treatise to convince his other colleagues to change course and to actually support the Zionist vision. Now, this book is a serious theological book and refutes anti-Zionist arguments that you will still hear today in circles like many parts of Satmar Hasidim. Interestingly, the book on numerous occasions compares the rabbinic leadership of his generation to the spies. Now, The rabbinic leadership of his day were not wicked people. They were luminaries of Torah. They were pious individuals. And Rashi notes, in actuality, the spies in the desert were not wicked people ultimately. They also were important people. Moses chose them. He must have chosen them for a reason. The Midrash says that these people were tzaddikim. They were righteous people. They were people that studied at the foot of Moses. If anybody was ready to take over and to lead the charge into the land of Israel, it was these 12 people. So if this was true, why would such pious individuals stay in the desert as opposed to going into the land of Israel? While Rabbi Tachtal asked this question about the spies, he is also turning to his own generation in the early part of the last century, a whole generation of scholars in Europe who told their flocks not to go into the land of Israel and to stay where they were. In the second introduction, he actually compares himself to Joshua and Caleb, who spoke out, said, yes, we can go. But that charge fell on deaf ears, and he fears that the words that he's writing right now at the end of his life also will fall on deaf ears, that people will not listen to his call, that yes, we can go in, we can inherit the land. Rabbi Tachtal gives a number of explanations of why these pious individuals did not embrace their destiny and enter the land of Israel. I would like to share one of them with you, and this is also an idea developed at length by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Consider those pious people in the desert. These people studied at the foot of Moses. They ate manna from heaven. They received water from a miraculous well. And every day they would wake up in the morning and they would see the middle of the camp with a cloud of glory descended upon the tabernacle. Now, we mentioned that these are pious individuals. If you are a person of piety, what more can you want? It's quite easy to think about these ultimate issues in such a womb-like existence. Everything is provided for you. It's so easy. You can focus on your ultimate concerns. They knew, the spies knew, when God said you need to go into the land of Israel, everything would change. You'd need to leave that womb. Because what will happen when they get to the land of Israel? They will need to wage war. They will need to build cities. They will need to plant fields. They will need to do real work. Manna will not come down from heaven. They will need to plant. What will happen to their souls in their daily grind? Why should we even bother to enter land of Israel at all? Wouldn't it be better just to remain right here in the desert, taking manna from heaven, water from a miraculous well, and gazing upon the clouds of glory? So these people were holy, but they were very misguided. Because the goal of Torah is not to live our values out in some rarefied utopian world, some womb-like existence, but in the real world, to bring the Torah into the real life and struggles of people. That is the destiny of the Jewish people. The 10 leaders were actually concerned that in the process of entering the land of Israel, they would lose their souls, their focus, their inner spiritual sense. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory says that they weren't afraid really of failure, that God was, because they knew God was on their side. What they were afraid of is what success would entail, the implications of that success upon their present life. So in essence, they didn't want to go into the land of Israel because they didn't want to change. They didn't want to adapt. And for this reason, God punished them. You don't want to embrace your destiny? So God denied them of that destiny. This has many implications for our situation today. The Jewish people, after 2,000 years, has returned to the land of Israel. That is a messy project. Not only ingathering people from all different places and all lands and all walks of life, but all differing visions of what the state of Israel should be. Beyond that, we didn't come into a barren land. Israel does not exist in a place beyond history. It is not a wilderness, not a midbar. It's a real place with implacable enemies. We have been given a life, a real gift in our lifetimes we've seen. This is the stuff of dreams that grandparents and great-grandparents could have only imagined. It was part of a Siddur. It wasn't real. Today we have this in our hands. But with this gift of the land of Israel comes real and great challenges. Some challenges that may even be insurmountable for at least the moment. Indeed, Jewish life in diaspora, in the Galut, is precarious, but yet in some ways maybe even easier. We are responsible to ourselves, our family, and possibly even our community. Yet the daily decisions that we make may not impact the fate of the state of Israel or the Jewish people or history. Much of the recent moralizing from elements of America, including Jews, comes from a place in which it is very easy to make religious pronouncements of morality and justice. Sometimes the values that we hear expressed are reflective of people that do not bear the weight of a real people with real dangers. They who are making these statements are ultimately only answerable to their own inner sense of justice, their own inner values. But those values ultimately are theoretical values. They're spiritual values of the desert, but they're never put to the test in real history and real time. While people may not admit it, many Jews and non-Jews alike see Israel in extremely utopian ways. The state of Israel is the product of religious imagination. The Israel that they imagine will always fail against the real Israel, at least until the Messianic age. They are looking at Israel from the desert, from afar. Yes, we have prophetic ideals. We have utopian ideals. We can never let go of those ideals. Yet, we are commanded in this week's Parashah to inherit the land of Israel. Our ideals must be realized in real time, in messy time, in historical time, and not from the place of a desert. We need to embrace our national destiny with all of those challenges implied. Wishing all of you Shabbat Shalom.